Dice are rolling, darkness falls. Inside the GM Studios halls. Tabletop games where nightmares creep. In a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Hello again, you sexy listeners out there in electric internet land, or I guess you'd have to be on the internet to be listening to the podcast. Nevertheless, welcome back to the side question episode of Inside the GM Studio, where we field questions from the internet, mostly Reddit, but there's some other things in there occasionally. I am your host, David.
And I'm Matt.
We're going to dive right in. As most of you already know, I roll a die and get a 15, and Matt selects a question, and we answer it blind. Shoot from the hip, Doc Holliday style.
All right, let's get my reading mode on. Okay, this one comes from Drew Stoffer 13 on our Ask Game Masters with the title, "How can I make pre-written modules / campaigns feel like it's built for the PCs?" I'm planning to run a pre-written campaign as a sequel to a homebrew Kids on Bikes one-shot I ran last year. I tried to build the world of the one-shot to include the NPC foils, victims in the party's family, and some key locations based on my PCs. I was really happy with the result, but now as I prepare to run a longer campaign, I was curious what others do to get that buy-in and give players a character arc, or at least conflict that feels satisfying to them. Any tips you have or stories of how you did this successfully would be helpful. Thanks. For those out there that don't know what Kids on Bikes is, it's an indie game that is kind of blown up in the rules light, more hippie games scene, where it's pretty much the Goonies. You play in the Goonies.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was like a NES RPG game that was kind of like that. And I can never remember what the name of it was, but it was a fantastic game. And it was like you were just kind of, kids in the neighborhood, and you were going on little adventures. And
Yep, and weird. And in this game, it's just weird. It's kind of like a monster of the week sort of thing. Some weird shit happens, and you go and investigate it as kids.
Yeah. So it's probably for any of those that you might want to check out this genre, like the movie that I just watched a couple of years ago. I think it's called Quest for Fire. Is very much this genre. It feels like a D&D adventure, but it's just a bunch of little kids being ragamuffins out doing things that kids do. And
that's exactly it.
Full of whimsy and full of adorableness, where the characters are somewhere between Charles Dickens characters and like the kids from Stranger Things, kind of in that genre.
I think what they're getting at in this, I don't know if you got something different, David, but it seems that he's talking about buying a pre-written module or campaign, but finding a way to put make an arc for the characters in it, like it was made for them, instead of just kind of like a regular module for your default party.
That's what I garnered from it too. Yeah. So, there's probably a couple of different ways to go about that. First of all modules are pre-written. That's what a module is. Like, it's just a module, or what they just call box adventures nowadays. But, so as is typical, try to figure out where you left off in the arc for your last adventure. So where did you leave off? Where does that leave the characters? Then try to go a layer beneath that and go, why are these character arcs or the culmination of the adventure, like what's the stakes? Like what did the characters gain or lose at the end of the previous adventure? Then try to go, well, what's the logical next steps for these arcs and for the story? Once you do that, then examine the module material and go, are there some commonalities that could be easily adapted, or you could throw a skin over them to make them seem more personalized as a logical continuation, as opposed to something that's siloed off, feels very generic, or likely tailored toward, you know, prefab characters. And you specialize them. Then you examine the components of the adventure. You go, who are the key NPCs? Do those key NPCs have motives, personalities? Do they fit into the plot, or do their relationships mirror some of the NPCs that were already established, so that you're not introducing an entirely new cast of characters? There's nothing wrong with having like a few new characters in any given adventure. You don't want to have the same cast of NPCs for every adventure. That'll get stale. But once you have that cast of NPCs, figure out, okay, well, this one kind of has a similar motivation or a similar relationship to PCA, or they served a similar role in the plot. They're the quest giver, they're the wise sage, they're the consultant, they're the mysterious stranger or something. You know, most NPCs in most adventures are going to fall into a few different archetypes, and whether you did so on purpose or not, in your homebrew, you likely touched on some of those archetypes. And just try to retrofit them. And if there's one that doesn't fit, or you want to spice things up by introducing slightly few more characters to kind of expand the
That
cast
is
of
a
characters.
jumbo jet. Jesus.
Oh yeah, I'm outside, folks, and there's some overhead flight. Anyway, if you want to expand the cast of characters, that's fine, but just try to make sure that they wouldn't otherwise neatly fit into an already established character. Don't, if you want the plot to kind of feel dynamic and have a lot of forward momentum, then you really need to limit how many NPCs are in an adventure. So really think hard about whether adding an NPC to the cast is worth your time. There's some novelty to PCs encountering new people with different personalities and different motives, but PCs also like when you play the hits, and so if they've connected with an NPC served a key role in an adventure, and then you just never bring them back into the plot, the PCs are likely to be a little disappointed. And so sometimes you can play with that and have a really strong NPC kind of go away for a while, and then just when the PCs think they might not come back, or they kind of forget, just bring them back into the fold, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that guy, he's cool. And similar for plot elements. Again, most adventures, whether you're consciously doing it or not, they follow a pretty typical structure. And not to get academic, but it's probably going to follow either like a 3-act structure or sometimes a 5-act structure, where there is a hook, or what they would call in fiction literature an inciting incident. Then you have where you set the conflict before the PCs. They are set to pursue some goal. Then you have rising action that raises the stakes and gives the PCs momentum. At some point in there, you're going to introduce some setbacks or some complications that are a wrench in the works. Then you're going to have an apex. You'll probably have some sort of falling action where you arrive at a climax, and then you might have some sort of denouement or epilogue. Try to figure out where those plot beats are in the new adventure. Do any of them tie to your previous adventure, or are any of them a logical extension to creating a new arc? Presumably the last arc resolved itself. So then the next arc needs to build upon that in a way that raises the overall campaign's arc, because the campaign will have an arc independent of each adventure arc. But if it's, like a parabola shape, then each subsequent parabola, you have like one that's kind of goes up this way, and then the next one goes up, but it should go up with the stakes even higher, and then the raising, like kind of like a line of data where you have like all these dot points, and you kind of go like, here's the through thread, here's where the data is kind of thing, and you kind of eliminate outliers. So you need to be doing that for your overall campaign. So what you would probably, if you're going to expand this first adventure into a wider campaign, and in order to ask yourself where the arc of the next adventure tags on, you should probably have at least a rough outline of the arc of your overall campaign and where you want it to go. Because otherwise, you're just going to be kind of floundering, and things are going to feel episodic. And there's nothing wrong with that. Episodic adventures are fine in a monster of the week sort of way, but even the most traditional of monsters of the week adventures in fiction and sorts typically do introduce some sort of background threads that are the overall for either the series or at least the season of a show or series of books, so that everything isn't just compartmentalized. Because in order to feel as though the characters are growing, especially if you have a campaign, he didn't mention what system he's using, but if you have something that's like level based, then you need to feel that each adventure is pushing an overarching plot of raising stakes to meet the characters' capabilities as they gain levels. Otherwise, an adventure that you have at level 8 shouldn't feel less dramatic than an adventure that you had at level 3, or shouldn't feel equally challenging and simple. You need to be increasing complexity, and you do that with expanding the cast of characters, gradually raising the stakes, and having plot momentum that pushes toward a larger goal than each component adventure.
Yeah, this is also another reason why I'm such a big fan of Session Zero. We talk about Session Zero a whole bunch. It's really good to get this information in Session Zero. It could be connections to, other folks that they've come up with that you can throw into the adventure at some point, use them as an adventure hook. Even connections to the bad guy, your big bad evil guy. Maybe they have a connection to him or them, and then that becomes your adventure hook itself. I know a lot of modules and pre-written campaigns have been that they already have hooks in there. They'll have like 3 or 4. So sometimes I like to go in there when I'm reading it, and I'll take those and jot down a few notes to kind of fuck around with it a little bit to make it connect to, if not just one of them connects to one of the players, maybe all of the PCs, or maybe I can get all 3 to work and have it to work for 3 of the PCs in the party. Other than that, other than just the simple answer of bring in their backstory, that's the simple answer. I can't think of anything else that would really do it.
But like retrofitting is not as difficult as it might sound, though, because you can go, like, especially with NPCs is a good example. So you take an NPC that in the new adventure could be something as simple as a personality trait. Okay, this character is the say soft-hearted person in position of power. That's a personality trait. It doesn't really matter if the person that character in the narrative is like, say, a noble. They're like a noble and the head of some like prominent merchant house. Okay, maybe in your little backyard adventures they weren't that. Maybe they served a different role in the plot, but the personality trait is a through thread, and you go, okay, can I maybe change this person's role in the adventure? Maybe they've gained status between adventures. Maybe they're the same, but now they're just serving a different role in the plot. But it could also just be as simple as in the new adventure, it's a fantasy it's a epic fantasy, whatever. And one of the characters is a stalwart knight. You know, he's a big, tough knight that like leads this captain of the guard, or he's the right hand man of the big bad evil guy. Well, you could just be like, okay, maybe the bully from the first. He doesn't have similar personality traits necessarily, but he kind of serves a similar role. He carries around a baseball bat, and he's this bully, and he's like the right hand man of the big bad evil guy. It's like, okay, he's kind of the same, and you could just retrofit him in to serve the role. You would, whether you would choose personality traits or archetypes or even just physical features, say like their class, denomination, and stuff like that, would depend on how how essential any given personality they trait they have has played out in the plot previously. And if it's tied to the plot in an essential way, if the sensitive hearted, noble in the previous adventure, their archetype did something to the plot. It was taking in refugees from an abandoned village or something, then that's relevant, and you probably want to continue that through thread. And hooks, yeah, they're a good way to get your party invested in a new set of circumstances, but I would try as much as you can to make sure that they're logical continuations. And typically the way I do that is go, okay, the previous plot arc resolved itself, but in what ways does this resolution leave some unfinished business, or in what ways does it add new complications to the scenario, where when you're looking at things on a small scale, they can seem resolved until you realize the broader implications. Those things should already be baked into most of the PC's motivations because they've gone through a plot arc already. The hardest adventure hooks are ones at the very first adventure for the very first hooks, because you have to try to rally the PCs all around like one thing, and that's hard because they all come from different backgrounds, different classes, and they don't know each other and all this, or maybe they do, but the players don't necessarily know one another at the table. But once they've gone through an arc, try to think of some things that are rallying points for them, and they should already be invested in the resolution of that and have some codified group identity, and pull at that thread, and it's a good entry point into your next adventure.
Some of these comments, the majority of them are all pretty much what I said, really. It was just use the backstory. Some of them are really good. And then there's this one that's just on the complete opposite end here, because I don't know if Steeman, who made this comment, knew that they were buying a module or, pre-written adventure of some sort to try to run for the game, where their comment says, my advice is try not to pre-write a campaign. One of the strengths of a campaign compared to shorter games is that PCs change and evolve, but that also means that what seems fitting and satisfying for the players with the characters they have at the start may be irrelevant when they get there. Instead, have a loose set of notes on themes, NPCs, and plot elements you may want to use in the future, but only plan 1 to 2 sessions in advance. Lets you adapt to what arcs players pursue and what they resonate with emotionally. It also makes your prep much more efficient because it's always based on what PCs are currently doing or on their immediate plans. So not much is wasted if they decide to do something completely different for what you expected.
Yeah, but does this guy co-host this show occasionally? Because basically he said, first of all, try not to pre-write an adventure. It's like, okay, but definitionally a module is an adventure that you did not write. And so basically he's
even
saying,
Drew Stouffer, the guy that made the post, said, I want to buy an adventure to run for my group, but I want it to be made for them. What do I do?
He's just saying don't do that, which is like, that's not useful. Like, it's like, we do this all the time. We basically say don't do that. And so I am inclined to agree with the commenter but this person is obviously, for whatever reasons, they prefer to have a module at their disposal, and it's easier for them to retrofit it. Here, I think we've given them some tactics to do that. Would it be better if they just homebrewed everything? Yeah, maybe. That's highly customizable, but it also ignores that there's a benefit to having some sort of skeleton of an adventure already established NPCs, some sort of conflict, things that are already, you can adapt, which that's what the question is how do I
Hmm.
adapt something that someone else wrote to make it seem like it resonates with my players. Try to just think through in a general sense, and this goes to the commenters' point. Emotional beats are typically key. Emotional beats resonate with characters. Do they gain something that gives them triumph or victory? Do they lose something? Do they potentially lose something that matters to them? Is something at stake? And that can be predicated on their backstory. Uh, but backstory pulling is often more in line with more narrative rich games and not more plot driven games.
Hmm.
So if you wanted a plot driven resonance, then really you're pulling on the backstory for the first adventure and that's it. And then beyond that, you might incorporate small elements, typically for like side quests or more character driven things that pull on the backstory. But mostly you want to be pulling from the main plot, which is already kicked off in the first adventure. Try keep pulling on that if you want a more dynamic and fast-paced adventure. If you want a more thoughtful and character-driven thing, then yeah, you can pull on their backstories, but that probably will be much easier in how do you incorporate things into the currently set adventure module that relate to the characters' backstories. Unless you've got some real, like, deep cuts, actor type writers who are crafting these really unique character backstories, you're likely to have a few elements that are genre specific. The big challenge I would imagine would be is if it's a backyard adventure where they're like little kids in the modern era, the and you have a module that is a, I'm assuming, fantasy based, uh, epic fantasy, heroic fantasy setting. The problem there is typically one of stakes, where the stakes are much higher and the scope is much bigger. And as a result, the genre tropes tend to not be the similar against those two genres. It would be like trying to take a horror genre and turn it into a comedy. It's like people have done that with genre blending, but it's a little more difficult because the expectations are not going to be baked into a fantasy-based RPG, or is not going to have the same genre tropes. But you could always think, how do I scale this down, right? You're in a fantasy-based RPG, maybe you're saving a village or a region, a province or something from a certain really big threat. And maybe you just scale it down to maybe it's
Mm.
just like a block in the neighborhood is under assault from something that's, you need to keep the character's state of mind and their perspective tight, because if you're playing a backyard adventure, then things that in another genre would seem inconsequential are going to be kind of a big deal. And so I would say just look at some things that you like in that genre and figure out how they tactfully tell stories that seem big in scope to the characters, but are really ultimately not in line with a different genre. South Park does this very well, where it's like they make it pretty aware that like it's a big thing because they're 8-year-olds. It's like
Hmm.
or whatever 10-year-olds, however old they are. It's like, yeah, that's what's a big deal to them is not a big deal to the greater world. So
Hmm.
try to find those threads and those commonalities, and then just adapt them either in scale or stakes or pacing, as it suits your previous adventure. Don't upend the model that you've already set when it comes to these things, because it'll seem jarring. The only way that you should be doing that is if you're gradually just kind of raising the stakes, but don't have it go from like maybe, a block level conflict, like where it's like, the kids on their block are fighting over territory or something, to like, you know, a citywide thing. It's too jarring, right? Go to the next step up and try to figure out what the logical widening of the lens is. You're not likely to ever get to saving the world in a kind of backyard adventure sort of situation, but that's fine. You don't need to do that. So,
Hmm. I'm gonna leave off on this here. Angry John put a comment in, and I never knew this. I'm gonna look into this a little bit more because I've never run a Pathfinder. They have things called adventure paths, which are it's like their adventure league. But Angry John says, look at Paizo's adventure paths, specifically the player guides. They have every PC choose a campaign trait that ties their character into the story. It could be anywhere from they were hurt by one of the villains, their mentor was kidnapped, or they need some MacGuffin from the ancient dungeon where part of the adventure is, or it could be multiple different things that go along with things like that. So yeah, I think that's a good one. I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, those are personal stakes, but the depending on the scope, having personal stakes is difficult because you have to have them all individually for every player, and that takes a lot of management. So if you can tie a personal stake to the larger stakes of the adventure, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but if you can tie it to the main plot in some way, right, then it becomes stronger, not only thematically for character motivations and purposes, because it's showing that that the things the characters want have impact beyond just their own personal investment. It ties it to the larger plot. It gets everybody kind of on the same page, and it has the noted benefit of being less work for you. So,
all right, I think that's going to be the end of this episode, unless David has anything to end on.
no, I got nothing else.
All right, well then we'll just leave